have Angela Baker, and she will talk about Trust Me, Trust My Open Data. And I think Hans gave a great intro, so please give a warm welcome to Angela.
Thank you. So I am here to talk about Trust Me, Trust My Open Data, but I could also talk about geospatial data all day long, because that's where I've come from, and I've worked over 20 years in geospatial. So yeah, that is my background. But let's talk about Trust Me, Trust My Open Data. So my name's Angela. I'm from the Open Data Institute. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about us as an organisation, because we've got lots of resources you might want to have a look at. I want to talk specifically about trust in data, and then a little bit about the impact of open data. So a little bit about the Open Data Institute. So we are a non-profit organisation. Our head office is in London. We're a team of about 60 people, so we're not very big, but we work completely across the world, so not just in the UK. And our aim is to work with companies and governments to build an open, trustworthy data ecosystem. So we work with lots of governments, we work with public bodies, we work with civil society, and it's really to build that world where data works for everyone. And I think from the previous discussion, we know that there's still quite a lot of work to do. Our work includes applied research, we do consultancy services, we have a learning team, and we also provide reports, tools, events, and webinars. So we were formed only 10 years ago. We were formed by Sir Nigel Shadbolt and Sir Tim Berners-Lee. You might recognise Tim's name. He invented the World Wide Web. And we're led by Louise, who's our managing director. So we focus our efforts in three main areas. We try to improve data practices for organisations so they can build and manage their data infrastructure and their data use. We try and tackle challenges that support the data ecosystem, and I'm going to talk about one of them today. And we try and gather and create research, evidence and knowledge about data and the benefits of trustworthy data access. So we're funded a third by UK government currently, a third by philanthropic funding, and a third by commercial activity through our learning and our consultancy services. That will change over time as UK government funding decreases. So I wanted to start with the data spectrum. And this is a really useful tool, and I know that you're all an open source audience, but when we're trying to promote data sharing, one of the things we found is that if we can demonstrate to organisations that we understand that there is a spectrum, they're more likely to open up some of their data. Because I think organisations can sometimes get a bit nervous about being told that they have to open everything up at once. And actually, there is an understanding that not all data can be completely open. Some of it can only be shared internally, and some of it has to be completely closed. So we refer to this a lot. Nearly every presentation we do, we start with the open, with the data spectrum. And I think it's a good way to communicate the benefits of open data. This is our theory of change. So we believe that good decisions that lead to positive impact can only be made when data is stewarded effectively. So when it's collected properly, maintained, and then shared appropriately. So not always completely open, but in an appropriate manner. Good stewardship of data allows us to create information from the data in the form of products and services, analysis and insight, and it helps inform better decision making. And I think you all know that quite well. But we see two alternative futures. We have the data fearing side, where you have organisations who are fearful of sharing data, and then you have the data hoarding side, where people want to hoard data. And we want to really try and release both sides of that theory of change. We also seek to build in ethical considerations when thinking about the collection, management and sharing of data. We want to ensure there's equity about who uses the data, so it's not just about the person, the publishing, but actually the user. We want to develop data literacy so that people understand what they're getting and how they can use it, and then also encourage open innovation, which we've seen in the previous presentation. So this is all good stuff, but how do you promote that to an organisation? Well, data sharing can help generate social and economic benefit between 1 and 2.5% of GDP. So that is a well-known statistic. And I think that's how we encourage governments and organisations to try and share data, is give them the facts so they can see the benefits. So talking a little bit about trust, we're focusing today on the data fearing side, thinking about trust. So when organisations are trusted and trustworthy, we see an increase in data flow. And when we talk about data flow, we're not just talking about an organisation publishing data externally, like an open data product. We're talking about flow within an organisation, flow back into an organisation, flow out of an organisation. So all of that data flow, and what happens with that data when it goes to the next user, and they maybe create a derived product from it, and then it flows on again. So we're talking about that whole pathway of that data. And it goes across all industries and all sectors. So that's the other thing, is that we're not being sector specific. So trust is quite an interesting concept, especially if you think about your own personal relationships, your business relationships. Trust is really important, but it's quite important when you talk about data as well. So gaining trust, we think, requires organisations to go above and beyond good data governance practices. So you can be managing your data well, but if you're not trusted, then you're missing out. And the issue with trust is that it's difficult to earn it, but it can be eroded very quickly. So you know there can be an article in a newspaper and suddenly an organisation is not trusted anymore. So trustworthy is where an organisation and its practices are worthy of being trusted, and trusted means that individuals do trust those organisations. So they're slightly different concepts. So we mentioned earlier that the ODI look at problems and try and solve them. Well, that's maybe too big an ambition, but we try to help them anyway, to help organisations. So what is the actual problem statement here? So data sharing requires both data supply and data demand to reuse that data. And currently data sharing, we think, is restricted because governments and other organisations that could share or reuse data are unable to assess the trustworthiness of the data sets or the data sets of the organisations. So we've seen in some of our research that you might have a large financial institution, and I'm talking a very large financial institution, who will purchase in data because they don't trust another team in the business. Now that is a cost to the business, and it erodes trust within the business. So actually, if you can prove that your data is trustworthy, you're going to be able to use it more. There are difficulties with sharing data compounded by the development of tech, as you all know. So if you have someone who doesn't really understand the tech they're using, that can cause an issue too. And then we have standards, informal and formal standards. And a lot of standards are specific to sector. And actually, we think they need to be maybe more horizontal across all sectors. So the programme that I lead on at the Open Data Institute is data assurance, which is building trust in data. I'm not so keen on the word assurance. I don't think it explains exactly what we're talking about. So let's use the word trust. And as I said, it's different to data governance. So data governance is managing your data appropriately, but data assurance is actually the processes or set of processes that increase confidence that data will meet a specific need, and that the organisations collecting, accessing, using and sharing the data are doing so in trustworthy ways. And we see that this really empowers communities, it creates more efficient public service, it helps people protect from harm. So if you're being trusted and you're using trustworthy data practices, you're not just managing data effectively, but you're doing it in a very good way, which is what we believe in. So as I said, we do a lot of applied research at the ODI, and we've done quite a lot of research into this area. And you start, I'm sure with a lot of your organisations, you start with a vision or an idea, and you think, we think this is an issue, but how do we make it a bit more tangible? How do we explain it to people? And at the ODI, we try and do some research on that so that we can then come up with some facts and figures. So there's an economic report on our website from 2021, which you're welcome to have a look at. Everything on our website is available under a Creative Commons license, so you go and have a look at the website. It's a little bit messy, but it's about to be relaunched in a few months, but there is a ton of information on there and tools that you can use. So this research is available, and we also have some new market research that's coming out at the beginning of June with a market briefing paper about the market requirements for data assurance. And some of the key things that came out is that there's increased complexity around the types of data that organisations use and how they use it. And there's a misunderstanding about internal data, external data, and some of that is around if an organisation's core business is not data publishing, they might not realise that some of their data would be really useful if they would make it available as open. So how can we change that internal data to external data? There's a growing use of external data by organisations. You know, there's a lot of data scientists now. We're seeing more CDOs at the C-suite level. You know, organisations can see that data should be treated the same as infrastructure and that it can really help build their business. There's increased demand for data assurance services so that people can assure the data, so they can show the trust. And there's also a clear requirement for rules of the road. So people like to be told, what can I do, how can I do it? So one of the key stats that we've got is that 94% of people agreed that external data assurance boosts their organisation's trustworthiness. So what are we doing at the ODI? Well, as part of my programme, we're running a project within that called Trusted Data Flows. So as I said, it's really important to consider the flow of the data, not just to look at the data itself. And we're looking at how we can assure those data practices and how we can assure data. And so we're looking at a code of conduct for organisations. There are lots of code of conducts out there, lots of certification processes, but not for data assurance at the organisational level. So we're doing some work on that, and we're also looking at a dataset checklist. What do you need to do to check that your data can be trusted? So as I said, it's not just checking that it's up to date and you've got a metadata file and there's an appropriate license. It's a little bit more than that. So do keep an eye on our website. We're currently just coming out of discovery phase into alpha. When we get to beta, we will publish it on the website for public comment. But if you are interested, you can contact me and we're happy to share our work and include you in our user engagement. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight about trust is data ethics. And we mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but at the ODI, we truly believe, and we live by this, that data should be collected and used ethically, and that it should be equitable for people who want to use it. So as you can see, 87% of people, this is from another survey we did, feel that it's important that the organisations they interact with about data is ethical. And we're not just talking about personal data. I think it's very easy to think about GDPR and personal data. We're talking about all data here. And we believe that to make data as open as possible, and while protecting people's privacy, commercial confidentiality, and national security is really important. And this links back to the data spectrum. So we're not saying that all data has to be open, but actually, if you can look at what can be made open, you're going to benefit from that. So we really advocate for the support of putting practices in place that support this ethical side of data. And this is our definition of data ethics. So anything you want to achieve in your organisation when using your data should include, we believe, an ethical component. And we have a free tool that you can use to help you with that. It's called the Data Ethics Canvas. So this was brought about to support organisations to ask reflective questions. So it doesn't give you answers, it makes you ask the questions. So the idea being that it doesn't matter where you are, which jurisdiction you're in, or what type of data, or what type of organisation, you can ask the questions and then you apply the answers based on your own situation. So it was created in 2017. It's since been reiterated 3 times. It's our most popular piece of information on our website. We have a whole stream of additional resources to go with it. We run data ethics professional courses, we run data ethics courses, we have consultancy services. It's something that is really important. And I think we had a really great example recently where a large bank came to us to train their leaders in data ethics because they wanted to increase their ethical standing with their customers. So obviously there's a business element, a little bit like Hans was saying. You have to create a business, you have to be paid for your work, but actually they're doing it from a good place, so they want to be more ethical. The canvas is split into 4. So what do you know about the data? So it might not be your data, it might be someone else's data. What are the licensing? Where's it come from? Is there any bias in that data? Have you thought about that? Thinking about the use of the data and the ethical risks that there might be in using that data. Are you going to disadvantage anyone by using that data? How are you going to engage? So have you thought about all user groups or just some? And then thinking about the longer term. So when are you going to review the data? Does it need updating? What are the actions falling out of that? So it's a really useful piece of kit. You can download it, print it off, it's PDF. I would highly recommend it. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about the impact of open data. I think you all know the impact of open data, but it's quite good to have some key examples. So from previous research we've done, we identified 7 key themes of business value, and I think when you're encouraging organisations, not just government, but public and private organisations, to open up the data, it's really good to demonstrate to them what is good for them if they open up the data. So one of the key things for me is that it demonstrates trustworthiness. So if you have an organisation that has opened up data, you generally tend to trust them more. And that started, of course, with government trying to be more open and transparent with the citizen. And we've got a lot of European countries where their public data is all open. But it's really moving more into the private sector now, where they want to demonstrate transparency to customers and also to shareholders, things like that. We know as well that opening up data can encourage innovation, and that's always a good thing. So we've seen some evidence in the finance and energy sectors of this, where maybe a regulator has stressed an importance of doing something. Data has been opened and it has generated innovation. So for example, well, I've got an example in a minute. I'll come back to that. Supply chains, thinking about how to improve supply chain activities, addressing common challenges across different sectors, improving, sorry, let me just go down. It can help improve your market reach, and also it helps in regulation as well. So there's lots of different information there, and it can really support your case if you're trying to encourage either your own bosses or some of your organisations to open up data. So thinking about some examples of this, so Transport for London, I live in London. I live on the Tube network. I don't know if anyone's been to London, but it's very busy. And I checked yesterday, and they have 5 million passenger journeys a day. And I think there's over 4,000 trains running, something like that, at any one time. Because I thought after the pandemic, those numbers would have decreased. But I can tell you it feels like there are 5 million people on the Tube when you come. So Transport for London, they started to open up the data in 2017, so quite a long time ago now, and they did a big launch. But what's great is they've continued that. So a little bit like Hans was saying, they haven't just done it and left it. They have really invested in that. And you can go onto their website. I went on yesterday. They've got a whole digital section. You can see their latest updates of what they've released. It's very specific, and it's absolutely brilliant. And what that did is that it allowed other businesses to then innovate. So Transport for London, their main business is providing transport services. They're not an app developer. They're not that's not their reason for being. They want to concentrate on their core business. So let other people who are experts do the development. And we've seen some wonderful apps come out of that really support the citizen. So I use a bus app all the time, and I use a tube app all the time. Because I want to know, when is it coming? Is it late? Is it delayed? So it's fantastic. And what they say is that by opening up that data, the benefits and savings are up to 130 million for London and TfL. So these are really nice figures. This was done by Deloitte, so it's a proper analysis of the value of that open data. And some of these numbers are a few years old, so they're probably even bigger now. That's a great example. In 2021, we helped the UK power networks to better understand their stakeholder needs, to develop tools and practices to publish and maintain open data, and to be considerate of the tension between security and privacy. So, of course, historically, the reason that power networks have said they can't release open data is that they can't risk any negative act against their assets. Well, actually, there are a lot of data that they can open up. They've created an online portal. It brings together thousands of data sets from different sources to provide visibility of the assets. And what's that helped is really these third parties to generate really interesting, businesses and information from that. So you're looking at anything to do with low carbon and renewable energy generators, flexible providers, charge point installers. So all these additional players in the market are now able to access that correct information. And one thing that I really like is that when they've been working with the regulator, they're called Ofgem, is that they have to now presume that the data should be open. So they have to prove why it should not be open rather than having to prove to make it open. And I think that's quite a big mindset change. So that's a really nice one. And actually some work that we're just looking at now with energy networks is looking at licensing of open data. And the regulator, again, has stepped in and said, you must have one license. We don't want 5 different versions of a Creative Commons license on your websites because that doesn't help the end user. And so we're supporting them in creating that one license. Another nice example is 2017 to 2019, the ODI partnered with the Eurasia Foundation to help the government of Ukraine with open data. And the reforms there in e-governance were led by the State Agency for E-Governance of Ukraine. And across Europe, we have lots of examples of great e-governance for the public sector. We trained 12 open data leaders, encouraged 4 cities to sign up to the Open Data Charter, and the national government adopted that Open Data Charter. And again, they've embedded those principles and best practices in order to implement a resilient open data policy. And if it's coming from the top, it always starts to filter down. So that's a really nice example too. And then my final example, I mean, I've got loads I can talk to you about, but my final one is about standards and open banking. So historically, banks have held a lot of data about their customers, but they wanted to improve their customer experience. But of course, there's a nervousness because obviously it's personal financial data, so there's lots of red flags in there. But what they wanted is for customers to be able to find products more easily and services more easily, be able to match customers to the right product. And what happened was that there was an open banking working group set up at the request of Her Majesty's Treasury in the UK, and ODI helped facilitate that. As a result of that work, there was a standard that was put in place called the Open Banking Standard, and you can go and have a look at the website. There's lots of nice information about it. But it's estimated to have created revenue opportunities of 7.2 billion, and it's adopted by 71% of SMEs. So when you're opening up data and you're trying to prove it, these kind of statistics are really important because they really demonstrate the impact and the value of open data and open standards. So that was all I had. You can contact me on my email. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to take any questions. Any geospatial ones? Thank you. Questions?
Great, thank you for that.
Thank you.
If anyone has questions, I can bring in the microphone because we're having a stream online, and it would be nice for people to hear the questions before Angela answers them.
No questions. Oh, one. Great. I hope it's a geospatial one.
We requested the data from the companies that said it's a problem because it's a secret or infrastructure. How did you handle it?
So what we find, I don't want to be rude, but what we find is that sometimes the person managing the data is not the person managing the policy that sits with the data. So let's use GDPR as a really nice example because we all understand GDPR. So organizations get nervous when sharing data because they don't want to violate a law or a regulation. And so they just say, oh, we can't share it because of GDPR. So there's this nervousness and this fearfulness. But it's because they don't truly understand, one, the regulation, and two, what they can share. So I think that explanation, what is it you're trying to achieve? What data have you got? Looking at the data spectrum, we're not asking you to give away national security secrets, but what can you share and what benefits?
I was thinking about the networking company for the power electricity.
Oh, the power networks.
We have a similar situation. We asked for data. No, we can't give you the data because then anybody could get the location of our network.
Yes.
Okay, you can see it from space.
Yeah.
We just want to correct the data.
And
no security reasons. Anybody can do a terrorist act on our network.
yes,
You can see it from space.
I know.
You have
And
Google Earth, load it and see it.
it's really tricky, but I think in that case, the push was coming from the regulator. So we have, I don't know how it is in other countries, but in the UK, we have regulators for the main, telecoms and energy and, water. And if the regulator forces something to happen because of government, then the companies have to comply. And so it came from the regulator. And I think we've been seeing, especially in energy, we've been seeing quite a lot of that. And as soon as the regulator says something, then it really supports that shift. It's like the stick. I mean, you need the carrot as well, but the stick is quite useful, especially in some of those industries where traditionally they wouldn't be sharing data because it is seen as, it's their asset. They've invested in it. Why would they share the information about it?
How is the internal data being handled?
How is what data?
Internal data.
So we did some, for the program that I'm working on with the trusted data flows, we were looking at what is the business problem. So we know there's a problem in the market, but what is the business problem? And we've got some key sectors that we're looking at, health, energy, environment, finance. So those are the key sectors. And we did some interviews with some large organizations. So we are going to span that out to SMEs as well. But we currently focus on some large organizations. So some of the NHS agencies, we've spoken to some of them. We've spoken to some banks. And the idea was to understand what is causing you an issue so that we could think about how we could solve it. And we actually had an example of a CDO who'd come into a new organization. It was actually a manufacturing company. And she started to badge the data internally so that it would get used more, so that people could see, okay, this is good quality, it's been checked, it complies with everything it needs to comply with, I don't need to go and read all the metadata, I can actually trust it. And by not using your own internal data for your own business and buying data from externally, potentially, that's a detriment to the business. So it's explaining that if you can trust your internal data and you can use it and get more value from it, it's good for the bottom line. So yeah, that's why we're looking at this kind of trusted data set internally.
Was there any issues? Because I know the case when Croatian Railway changed their website, they switched to API-based, but if you browse a bit, you could find out a lot more information that I believe even GDPR would allow, like name of the driver of the train.
I mean, we could talk about data protection all day, couldn't we? So all organizations have got a data protection officer. And if there's a data protection breach, they should have a policy in place to review that, put in place what's gone wrong, fix it. And then they can also get referred to the regulator, the ICO, so they can be referred for that. So there's an incentive for businesses to not breach, especially personal data issues, data protection issues. And there is a responsibility at the senior level to have policies in place to deal with that. It does happen. I mean, we've had it. Someone does something by mistake, but it's how you rectify it, and then you make sure that it doesn't happen again. But yeah, if something's been made available through a website, then that's certainly a slight issue that would need to be rectified immediately.
Yeah, a question. You said regulators decided to press the companies
Yes.
to do something.
Yes.
Who pressed the regulators?
Government.
Government.
Yeah. So
Because if the colleague here said what we could get terrorist attackers or something. There is in Croatia, I think it's every day some terrorist attack with the excavator, clipping the lines, clipping the the internet lines.
But like Hans said in his previous but one presentation, I think, the EU directives are really useful because that is forcing change, and it's forcing not just government but other organisations to really to open up data, make things more accessible, more findable, and there are then things in place to support that. You know, there are a lot of grants within the EU to support data to be made more accessible. And I think, again, that's that stick, isn't it? So it's the EU saying, right, if we want to go for Digital Europe, we need to do this.
Yeah, but I think at this moment, the EU is just giving the guidelines.
Yes.
I think it needs a little bigger stick.
You can take our case study and send it to them if you want. Show the business benefits. It can be done, yeah.
The relevant bit of legislation for that is the Interoperability Act, and that doesn't only specify the formats and the semantic structure of data, but also gives directives on what data needs to be published. So look at Interoperability Act, and the program that I mentioned under reference Interoperable Europe is actually there to help governments, and with helping governments, that also means stimulating governments to actually do something. So, yeah.
I think as well, there has to be a recognition, this is my own personal opinion, not the opinion of the ODI, but there has to be a recognition with anything that's open, whether it's software, standards, data, there is a cost somewhere. So even once you open the data, and that is generating wonderful benefits, someone's still got to host that and maintain it and look after it, otherwise it loses its value. So I think it's trying to communicate that effectively so that where the benefit is coming from, it can feed back in to fund it and keep that going and progress it. Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, one more.
Because you open the data and the passenger can more efficiently use the tube, and because of that you use it more frequently. And there is much more income to the tube operator.
Yeah, I think our Mayor of London might disagree with that. But, you know, these are always issues, aren't there? But yes, and again, it's coming back to core business. What is the core business of the organisation? To run transport services. So yes, for their customers, it would be brilliant if they could create loads of apps, but actually that's not their business. So let someone else do it, let an expert do it, and generate that wider community within that sector.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.